This just makes too much sense, as Bryan Rust of the Pittsburgh Penguins has been at the center of trade talks for a while now, but a new article from the fourth period says that one team in particular with big links to the Pittsburgh Penguins has been linked to Bryan Rust. We have to dive into the reports that link Bryan Rust to the Toronto Maple Leafs, how this affects the Maple Leafs' top six moving forward, and what a trade package could very well look like, as Kyle Dubas could very well be doing some interesting business with his former team. All of that coming up on this episode of Hat Trick HQ. But hey, before we get into it, quick reminder, most of you guys watching, about 70% are not subscribed, and we are less than 200 subscribers away from 18,000. Just wanted to say thank you guys for watching every single day in the off season, and we're here to cover all the latest news on your favorite team. And Mark, let's dive into this right now. Now, look, we've been hearing a lot of talks about Bryan Rust recently. This from a few weeks ago, saying trade interest in Bryan Rust and Rickard Rakell continues to be heavy. Things got really interesting a few days ago, and this is still the case. Here's the latest. Now, there's been a lot of stuff since then. No actual movement on these two guys, but they're both prominently featured in the fourth period's recent article for top trade bait candidates, as Bryan Rust comes in fifth because he has 3 years left on his contract. He has his full no movement clause, and it expired at the end of June 30th there, leaving without any no trade protection. There's already plenty of interest, but the more important thing, Mark, are the teams reportedly linked. You can see Buffalo, you can see Columbus, but Toronto is the interesting one. Now, before we dive into like the lines and all this stuff, what do you feel about Bryan Rust and the Toronto Maple Leafs as a pairing? Because to be honest, at his cap hit, at his production, to me, it just makes a ton of sense.
I mean, I think that's the biggest thing. We know a lot of teams are looking for top six help, and a lot of teams are specifically looking for a center. Now, Bryan Rust is not a center, but Toronto does not need to worry about a center. We know Austin Matthews, John Tavares headlining the top 2 centers on this team, but Bryan Rust comes in and fills a void on this team. Now, listen, the Leafs lost Mitch Marner. You're not going to get his production out of Bryan Rust where it becomes playmaking and his defensive capabilities, but Bryan Rust brings a new thing to this team, which is Stanley Cup experience and also goal scoring, where we've seen him have a career year last year playing next to Sidney Crosby. And listen, he's going to make everyone look very good, but still 31 goals, very productive on this Penguins team. I think with the Leafs, they're going to do anything they can do to find another top 6 winger. And with Bryan Rust and with even general manager saying that everyone is wanting to buy, except for the Pittsburgh Penguins, I think this is getting into the territory of it makes too much sense for Toronto not to actively look at a trade for Bryan Rust.
Yeah, and it comes down to, again, like, how do they do business with Dubas, right? Because, that's always going to be a bit of a weird stomping ground where it's like, Dubas, maybe he wants some people he had in Toronto. Well, we're going to talk about that in a bit. But, like, at the same time, put that awkwardness aside. It's a business, and I'm sure they're able to conduct business in a professional way. So when you have a guy like Rust, I think, again, the cap hit just makes it so worth it. Because, again, he's got 25, 26, 26, 27, and 27, 28. 3 years, expires at the age of 36. Yeah, he's expected to decline a bit, but it's shown that with good playmakers, the dude is a 30 goal scorer. And regardless, the dude's been like a 20, 25 goal scorer every single year. There's no real peaks and valleys with Bryan Rust. What you're getting is consistent output, and the guy is really not slowing down that much. In fact, he's picking up pace, putting career highs. Yes, next to a guy like Sidney Crosby, but even Crosby's getting up there in age. So, at the end of the day, the cap hit fits well with the Leafs. They have some contracts they can move out. But Mark, as we look into the Leafs lines, I think it's just looking at it objectively, it does add that extra bit of punch you want. Now, we were talking, like, does Bryan Rust actually take you over the top and all of a sudden make you a way better contender? Not necessarily. Like, I don't think Bryan Rust is going to bring, like, a whole new level of production on that first line, especially since, like, neither Matthews or Nyes is like that kind of, no one's a Sidney Crosby-esque playmaker, but you know what I mean. Playmaking is not really either of their top strong suit, should I say. So Bryan Rust, I think, does bolster the top 6, though. Again, at that cap hit mark, I can absolutely see something like this working, but I have to think that Dubas might want for a decent bit from the Leafs, especially since there's probably a lot of teams who are willing to take on this kind of money for this kind of production.
And I think that's the biggest thing. We know Brad Treliving has been adding depth through this team, something that Leafs fans have been calling for year after year. We see Waugh join this group as a third-line center. We're seeing Dakota Joshua in a trade from Vancouver. We know this team wants to add depth, but they still need that one key piece in the top 6, in my opinion, to be a true contender. And listen, Leafs fans, 30 goals from Bryan Rust is awesome, but he also does have some very good playoff numbers. The last playoffs he played with the Penguins, putting up 8 points in 7 games. Now that came in 21-22. He is a little older since that point, but still coming off a career, he's been red hot, winning 2 Stanley Cups at a young age, but still knows what it takes to be in a winning system, going back to back and that, going on a deep run. He knows what to bring to this team, and I think that adds a lot of value that we're seeing a lot of teams do, bringing in that experienced players that can produce, but most certainly going after the guys that are going to be physically engaged in a playoff series. And listen, this is going to take a bit of cap movement. You're not going to go out and be able to run all this. There is a 5th line down there, but that is for extra forwards and 2 key pieces. And I do think bringing Bryan Rust to staple on that top line, yes, it brings goal scoring, but I do still like the idea of them adding a playmaker. Now, you can still move William Nylander up if you want, and move a guy like Domi up if you need to, but I do think Bryan Rust brings something that this list team needs, and that's experience with even more goal scoring.
I think that's right on the money, right? Like, and I mean, we've talked before about how, the Leafs, they do a good job with it, like the Oilers kind of do too. When you have such good talent, like amazing superstar level talent there in your top 6, like you can kind of put anyone and they'll put up decent numbers, right? But like, in an ideal world, you don't want to have to play Matias Maccelli high up in the lineup or Max Domi, these kind of guys where you really, really want them to produce with these top lines. A guy like Bryan Rust just gives you a level of certainty, He just gives you that certainty that he's going to be able to lock into that top 6, and there's no questions as to whether he'll live up to the expectation. He just is. Yeah, is he going to score 30 goals, have 65 points again? Maybe not, but you can guarantee, I would say, at least 20 to 25, and probably even more, again, especially with the pressure taken off him directly, with the chance creation from guys like Nyes and Matthews or wherever he ends up playing. I think it makes sense, and I think he could even play some power play, whether first unit, probably second unit, right? But again, with the Leafs, Mark, you can move out money like David Kemp, Calle Yarncrook if you need to make this work, and I think that might be worth it. But you got to think that Dubas is probably eyeing certain players in particular when it comes to Toronto, right? Players and draft picks, because the Leafs do have, especially coming 28, 29, they have some draft picks they can move. Yeah, there's some seconds and thirds here. Maybe Dubas might want a first-round pick. I don't know if he'll get that for Bryan Rust. Again, though, the value for the money, especially with the rising cap with 3 years left of control, is pretty valuable. Mark, do you think Dubas has his eye on any of the guys that maybe he liked when he was in Toronto? Because Toronto does still have a couple of young guys that could be on the move, let alone the draft capital.
I think a lot of teams are going to call in 2 players in particular. Looking at the defense, the Leafs are pretty well set on this. They don't really need to add on this end. And that's where it goes to one player in particular. We see Ben Danford, drafted 31st overall, has been producing at a good rate. I believe he won the OHL Best Defenseman, whatever it might be. Ben Danford is a big name that teams are most certainly looking at, but I think the biggest one is Cowboy, Easton Cowan, their top prospect in the system. And listen, we spoke on this before recording, Josh. With Bryan Rust, I'm not sure if he takes you from a playoff team to a contender on his own, and I think that's where Brad Treliving might look at this and say, hey, Cowan might only be a year or 2 away. We don't want to move on from this piece if Bryan Rust is not going to be the game breaker that we need to hoist the Stanley Cup or even make the Eastern Conference, for God's sakes.
Yeah, like it's a tough situation because like Easton Cowan's a good prospect, but like, is he worth trading away for the uncertainty of Bryan Rust? Like you said, that you're not sure if he'll take you over the top. No doubt a big improvement to the team, and objective value-wise, yeah, it might be worth it. But then again, if you're saving Easton Cowan to either play for you or trade for that kind of like definite guy who's going to change you from a playoff team to a contender, are other teams going to be like, Easton Cowan is enough for that? So it's a bit of a weird middle ground where you want to stand your ground with your prospect. You want to see if he's going to do it for you. But is it worth moving him on for Bryan Rust? Because you have to think Dubas is probably starting the asking for a guy like Easton Cowan. Maybe Ben Danford and some picks could do it too, but like you have to imagine other teams like we saw Buffalo, Columbus, and there's probably more calling. I don't know. It's a very interesting story with Bryan Rust. He's going to get moved. It's just a matter of when, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about the Leafs trading for Bryan Rust? Is it a good idea, bad idea? Would Easton Cowan be involved? Would he not? Leave your thoughts down below, because that'll do it for this episode of Hat Trick HQ. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Thank you for tuning into all these videos all summer long. I'm Josh Gosse, my co-host, Mark Pye. We'll catch you in the next one.